Live at the Vive, I'm Nigel Barker. It is Wednesday afternoon, it is 5 p.m. Eastern, and we are going live with an extraordinary person, a clinical psychologist, someone who I love, Dr. Shefali. Dr. Shefali, you've heard of probably from Oprah Winfrey. If you haven't read her books, if you haven't seen or been given Conscious Parent, if you're a parent, you would have seen it because I've got it. It's one of my favorite books. And let me see if she's already here. Is she here to go? Not just yet. She's got so many extraordinary books, and she's an incredible speaker. We've been talking about her all day long. If you've seen her in our stories, you'll just see how sort of transformative her message is. It is, of course, on the subject of mental health, which is something which we at Vive take very seriously and have tried to bring you the best extraordinary experts from all fields when it comes to health, wellness, and fitness. But Dr. Shefali is someone who's right there at the very top, endorsed by Oprah Winfrey, has New York Times best-selling books, to say the least. So Dr. Shefali, if you are here, we are ready for you. We are extremely excited. Do you like the lighting I have? Okay, I've got this sort of backlighting going on, which is a little different from my usual. Obviously, I'm always trying to make sure that I can find a space to get to do these lives in, and I'm doing them from all over the country, sometimes all over the world. Right now, I'm in New York City. I'm actually in a movie theater. I'm in an old movie theater, which is pretty cool, and I'm alone. Except for the projectionist. So check that out, people. You've got to get creative on these lives. Anything to make it happen. I kind of feel like, let me show you actually. Why don't I just show you as you're waiting what I'm looking at? Yeah, how about that? I'm using the light from my screen to light my face up. It does rather a great job. So if you ever need a great light when you're doing this, set your laptop up, open it up, put it on email or put a white screen up, and it'll light yourself up. Here comes Dr. Shefali. You no longer need to hear me talk about lighting and my setup, because we're going to talk about mental health with Dr. Shefali. Here she is.
Hey.
How are you?
Good. I'm sorry I'm a few minutes late. I didn't know I had to refresh it constantly. So you were there and I was waiting. I'm like, where is he?
I was here. I was, it's perfect timing. I was just showing everybody where I am.
Where are you?
I'm in an old theater in New York City.
It looks gorgeous.
Rather cool. I got this rather unusual lighting, which I thought actually lends itself to the subject of mental health and our mental health in general. It's such a pleasure to have you, Dr. Shefali. You and I have spoken before.
Yes. Thanks for having me, Nigel. Such a pleasure.
The pleasure is literally all mine. I mentioned this when we last spoke, but we were introduced by Deborah Lee Furness, who's Hugh Jackman's wife, and she's an extraordinary friend of mine. She's a wonderful person, and she was just absolutely just beaming about you. It's the most extraordinary things. And I knew about you. I've been following your career, as have so many people. I've seen you on Oprah. But when a friend personally endorses someone and says, and on privately says, you need to speak to this person, that was what really for me was like, okay, this is an extra endorsement. So that's just wanted everyone to know out there, because people often wonder how I find the people who I bring to Vive and what the story is behind them. And it isn't simply because they have a New York Times best-selling book. It isn't just simply because they're famous or they have a huge following. It is very personal. It is something which I take incredibly seriously. And I try to make sure of everyone that we bring the best. So Dr. Shefali, congratulations on all your success. Let us dive straight in. Okay, you have a new book, Radical Awakening. And it seeks to teach women how to transcend their fears and delusions and break free from societal expectations and rediscover their authentic selves. What was for you the spark that said, I need to write this book now?
As a therapist working with scores of women, seeing that even if they lived in the West or in the East, they were truly challenged by a loss of inner power, inner knowing, really moved me. And then in my own life, observing how, despite, as you said, my success or my outward trappings of achievement, I too was prey to a constant abandonment of my inner power. And I just saw us as a collective, as women, in this culture that we live in, where we're almost endorsed to be the good ones, to be the kind ones. And what that means in our subconscious means to put ourselves last, to wait for leadership from the outside, and to second guess ourselves, to be in eternal states of ambivalence or confusion. And I see this with my clients, I see this with myself. And I felt that I needed to help women to have the permission to break those barriers.
You know, I was just, thank you. I was just yesterday on a panel with the United Nations Women, specifically for their global summit on gender equality. And I've been an ambassador for the UN with Girl Up for over a decade. And, you know, it strikes me as something which, again, is extraordinary, where here's a summit, and absolutely it's on gender equality and it's for Girl Up. But I was one of only a couple of men involved in the whole discussion. And I understand, obviously, that this is going to be predominantly female-based and what have you. But how important are men in the equation of getting this right and making change, right? We can't do it necessarily. It's not a one-sided argument. It's not a one-sided thing, is it? We have to get together. We have to do this together. No.
Yes. So very important, but also women first need to, as a collective, come together and realize that we can't wait for either each other or for the other sex. We need to wake up to our own internal individual power. So it starts with the individual, it starts with the micro, then goes to the collective. And of course, we need to raise our men into a consciousness. But if we ourselves are not ready to claim consciousness and ready to embody it, how can we expect the men to do so? So many female-centric movements have just lambasted men or vilified them, and that's going to get us nowhere. You know, but on the same token, men need to do their own work. You know, the other day I was in an interview with a man, and he was asking me what I meant by the toxic patriarchy. You know, I mean, in a challenging way, not in a curious way, as if he couldn't believe that we were in a culture that was toxically masculine. And that doesn't mean it's against a male in particular. It just means it has qualities of excessive masculinity, of toxic masculinity, where a man, you know, can be protective, and that can be his beautiful side. But now in our current toxic world, that protectiveness has become aggression and dominance and an overwhelming sense of conquering of those that come below. There's no interdependence left in our world anymore. So that's what I mean by toxically masculine. So it's not against men in particular. These are the qualities of our current era that we as women and men need to overthrow, but only when we're willing to call it what it is, without taking it personally, you know?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I've always seen it as cowardice. I've always seen it as, you know, weakness. Actually, when you're unable to let the other person step in front of you, when you're unable to give opportunity to someone else, when you feel scared or perhaps, you know, inadequate, that's what leads, I believe, to so many of the issues. Now, of course, a lot of this is inbred into young men from the get-go, right? They're taught that they are better, that they will be, that they will succeed, that they will inherit, that everything will come to them, you know, and that, you know, you see this over and over again. And I come from, you know, my mother is from Sri Lanka, my grandmother is from Sri Lanka, and, you know, I grew up with two very strong, powerful women in my family, you know, and my grandmother was apparently, as rumor has it, the very first woman in Sri Lanka to drive a car, which was outrageous apparently at the time. And she cut her hair short, which was also, you know, sort of sacrilegious almost. And then she married a white man, which actually got her cast out of the family at the time, you know. And so, you know, and then she left the family, and I was brought up by these extraordinary women who, against all odds, because, you know, being Sri Lankan in England in the 70s and 60s was no easy feat, you know, to bring up a family. But so I had perhaps a different background to a lot of people when it comes to, you know, appreciating the women in my life and understanding that and wanting to bring them up. But one of the things that I speak to a lot is how my own daughter Jasmine is how I've watched her grow up to be an extraordinarily enlightened, powerful, you know, just confident person who believes that she can do anything. And that's the same way as my son, but that is not what I see when I look at necessarily everyone else's children, that same content. I see that difference between how kids are being brought up. You have this great book, Conscious Parent, which we got when we first had children and what have you. What is it that you think that people need to do? It's the very first thing that how parents should be, I guess, teaching their children, bringing up their children to set the standard, because it starts there. It starts with that generation as soon as you're born, right? It's not something you can it's not easy to teach to an adult necessarily.
Yeah. So when I wrote The Conscious Parent, which I think was pivotal for me as a mother to really embody, it was because I saw as a mom my own raging ego. And what I mean by that is all my unmet needs, all my sense of unworthiness, all my emptiness, my sense of incompleteness being projected onto my child. And I was using her to fill me up. And I had no idea I would do this. I had been meditating. I was a psychology student at Columbia doing my PhD. I thought I was immune from the ravages of my unconsciousness. So when I saw my ego roar, this was by the time my daughter was 2. I mean, just by the age of 2, I was roaring ego. And I saw how I needed her to be under my control, under my possession, under my ownership. So when I saw this leaky ego, I realized if I am this way, having meditated and studied psychology, what chance do other people have? And so I wrote, I got it. I understood what we were doing wrong as parents. We were using the canvas of our children to project our unmet dreams and realizations and manipulating and exploiting them in the name of discipline, in the name of love. I saw my pollution right there, my mental pollution. And so I wrote the book, The Conscious Parent, and it got a lot of resistance at first because parents were not willing to own up to their demonic ego. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. But once we can do that, we begin to see the ego in others and we begin to see the ego in culture. Culture is full of a false, demonic, raging emptiness, fear-based, scarcity-based, that is polluting all of us, right? Culture is polluting all of us with its false ideals that you should look a particular way, you should be wealthy in a particular way, you should achieve. And these standards are bombarding our children and bombarding us as women in particular. And we are succumbing to its pressure. And look at today's children. Look at today's teenagers. Mental disorders have never been so high as they are currently. Partly because of the pandemic, just remotely, but mostly because of social media, because of increased isolation, because of instant gratification, technology. So we are further and further disconnecting out of true self into false self. And this is a raging problem.
It is a raging problem. It's one of those things. You mentioned culture, and clearly one of the things that has been a big issue in my own family is the fact that I come from this sort of mixed background, if you like. I have a English-British side of me and my father, and I have a Sri Lankan heritage, my mother. And when you bring them together, when I grew up in the 70s in England, I was one of the very first children and the only kid I knew who was part Sri Lankan, part English. And of course now that a lot has changed in 30, 40 years, but back then it was very different. And that identity crisis that so many people go through when they, perhaps, for example, in the United States, where you've got people from other countries who come over here and they're asked to be American or they're meant to be British, and yet they also identify with another culture or another country that has perhaps different cultures, different things that traditions and what have you. It can be very complicated for people, and it gets in the way. And religion plays a large part of this, and you see that seep in across, no matter where you are in the world. And we dealt with this personally. And how do you recommend people deal with their identity? How important is identity? Does it wrap back into ego?
It does wrap back into ego. And you're asking a really seriously deep, profound question. It sounds like a simple question, but it has, if you really want to be free of identity crisis, you have to let go of the attachment to your identity. So all of this has been created as ways for our individual egos to create superiority, separation, clannishness, tribalism in the worst ways possible. What are you? People ask, what are you? What are you? What are you? Right? Who we are, in essence, is not the synagogue or the mosque or the church we go to in any way. It isn't our height necessarily. It isn't our roles as mother or CEO. So who are you? Right? So the world right now, for the most part, the mainstream matrix is stuck in the very concrete definitions of the who are you, right? It is your bank account, it is your religion, it is your height and weight and status. And in the spiritual world, in the Buddhist world, so to speak, or in another way of looking at it, these identifications are the nooses around your neck. They're going to drag you down. They will be the cause of your suffering. So realizing their voidness, their emptiness, their illusion is the way to liberation. These identifications mean nothing, and yet people are holding on to them and waging war in their name when they essentially mean zero. They mean zero. Because who you are really, truly, in your essence, authentically, is something beyond definition or box or container and ism, right? So look at our mind. The global mind is kind of stuck in the world of concrete, dense form. All the isms, all the numbers, all the boxes and the containers. How sad. How sad that we're stuck there. And then people suffer, children suffer. If they don't have the right kind of hair, apparently that's a bad thing. Why? Because there's a box for good hair, which is all a lie. There's no box for good hair. There's box for healthy hair. I understand that. You live longer or whatever, maybe. But there's no box for good hair. The good is a judgment that we've imposed on reality. And everyone is doing it. The Muslims think they're better than the Jews. The Jews are better than we're doing it in all categories. And it's so inane and insane if you really stop to think about it.
No, absolutely. In fact, it's not just have I stopped to think about it, I've felt guilty of being a part of it, right? I've personally worked in the fashion industry, as you know, for better part of 30 years. I've, worked on television on many big shows like America's Next Top Model and The Face with lots of, sorry, there you go, I'm back. Supermodels and everybody else.
Yes, you're back.
And I've felt the weight of this too, but I've also felt that perhaps using my soapbox, I can also perhaps change the narrative, and at least get people to listen and hear what else can be said and what is being said when it comes to, what is it? The fact that one shape does not fit all, one style does not fit all. That one idea of beauty is just that. It is one idea of beauty, and that ultimately, beauty, we are the sum of our imperfections, are we not? And that is in fact what makes us extraordinary. Is our
and you've seen Nigel firsthand through America's Top Model what those girls went through. I used to watch that show when I was younger. What those girls went through to fit into that very slivered slot of what perfection was, and how they loathed themselves, and it took so much for them to really arrive at a place of self-celebration. I mean, like you said, you were part of the industry, and part of this industry is punitive and very pernicious for young girls, because they fall prey to being on the runway, and then their inner critic is on fire.
And it, of course, travels down to the consumer, where young girls like my daughter, for example, will see advertising campaigns, will look at magazines, will see television shows, and all the rest of it, and it really affects them as to what they think the true beauty is, or they don't see themselves there. So it's very interesting, going back to what I'm creating now, which is a platform called Vive, which is a health, wellness and fitness platform. The entire point of it was, in fact, to help level the playing field, was to sort of say that fitness as well has been very elitist, that it has been, the whole health and wellness industry has been very elitist. There's been this sort of one vision, and it wraps into fashion too, whereas there is this idea that having washboard abs means that somehow that is the sort of epitome of fitness, that is the epitome of perfection, that somehow being slim by having a certain shape, a certain size, that the way you look was healthy. And of course, that has almost nothing to do with true fitness or being healthy or wellness. Obviously, eating well and sensibly and carefully is a large part of it. But we are so critical, and we are can be so nasty that so many people feel that they cannot go to a gym, that they cannot be there, that fitness or sport isn't for them. You know, I'd love to ask you, in your opinion, have you seen this obviously with pro athletes as well and people like that, how one helps bridge that gap and, you know, introduce a healthy mindset when it comes to fitness and personal well-being for all people?
Yeah, it's what I see everywhere, that until and unless the very rigid, pedestalized idea of perfection is not ruptured, we will want perfection, whatever we decide that standard is in the modern era today. So as long as we're seeking perfection, it's unattainable. So it's a cat and mouse game. It's around the carousel, and the woman especially will forever be plagued, because you see now it's not just a curvy figure. Now the elbow has to be perfect, and the earlobe, and the cheekbones, and then the creases. I mean, now we've taken apart every body part. It's not just the body now. Now it's the body parts, and you know, women want to look unreal, really, and it's really sad because they'll do anything. They're dying to be perfect. So as long as that remains as our pedestal of vision for ourselves, we will forever be loathing of ourselves, because it's an unattainable standard. You know, who says what is the perfect woman, right? There's an idea of it. So I think for us women in our personal lives, we have to personally decide to slaughter that vision, that idea that perfection exists, to chase it and just annihilate it in our lives, like destroy it. So instead of that, so once that's destroyed or toppled over, now we can replace it with the embrace of ordinariness, the embrace of average. You know, women are allergic to this word, you know, be average, be happy with good enough. You know, in motherhood, there was a psychologist who created a revolution in psychology. Winnicott was his name. And he called it the good enough mother. He was like, the good enough mother is a good enough mother, you know? And that's what I always tell myself. Good enough looks is good enough looks. Good enough achievement, good enough mothering. Just be happy with the good enough. And we've lost that. We're so far from good enough. We're like insanely robotic now in our idea of machinated perfectionism. It's insanity, you know. So each woman has to debunk it for herself and trash the magazines, not watch shows like yours, sorry. Like, no, resist, revolt, because that's the industry that perpetuates our madness. So we have to have the self-discipline to go, oh, wonderful, she wants to look like a robot. Wonderful, he wants to look like that. I don't. I want to look natural as much as I can. Now, of course, I'll dye my hair if I want to. I'll use, you know, whatever little bit of playing with whatever I can, but I'm not going to die to be perfect. I'm not going to mangle my body to be perfect, you know. And then you come into a healthy flow of being average and being healthy and taking care of healthy. Yeah. Not trying to shoot for the stars, which is insanity, you know.
Oh, you mentioned the word ordinary before, and you know, I always think about the word extraordinary, right? And in that extraordinary is the word ordinary, and yes, it is extraordinary, actually. And there is something rather wonderful about being extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah. Be extra average. Be extra happy being ordinary, you know. And then you develop peace. But you have to do this, Nigel. You have to really have the power within you to turn away from mainstream culture, like. You know, don't look. I used to look at magazines. I will not look now. You know, I used to turn on the TV. I will not turn on the TV now. So you have to realize that culture is toxic, and imbibing those messages is going to make you sick. So don't wait for culture to change. You are culture. Change the culture for yourself, and teach your daughters to not pedestalize this unrealistic standard of perfection.
No, 100%, 100%. I mean, you know, literally, we created this platform, Vive, to do exactly that. We've set out to sort of demonstrate, when we talk about people being outside of the box. It's the wrong expression. Really, we've sought to seek out the most extraordinary teachers, trainers, experts, doctors, fitness gurus who are just living their best life and are, regardless of what other people judge them by, whether they are full figured or whether they have a disability or, whether they have, whatever the issue might be, it's other people's issues, it's not theirs. And we've featured, for example, Anthony Ferraro, who is an amazing para-Olympian who's blind, and he surfs and he skateboards, and he will literally tell you that his only disability is a bad attitude, and that however you see him, that's how you see him, and he sees things so clearly, and he says, I'm blind, but literally I've never known anyone to see things in such a clear, beautiful manner. We have a guy called Garrison Red, who's another Paralympian in a wheelchair, and he's just this extraordinary athlete, does anything and everything that he wants, pull-ups with the wheelchair attached to his body, nothing stops him, nothing gets in his way. And you see the power in these people who are not paying attention to what society says they can do, should do, how they should fit in, how they should feel awkward, how perhaps you could be embarrassing to us, or whatever that might be. To hell with it. They are living their best life, and that is power. That is a revolution, and it shouldn't be, but it is. And I think we have to, don't you believe, we have to get to a point where none of this is news, right? This is the way of it. Is this what radical awakening is about? I mean, and will there be a radical awakening for men as well? Because I know this is for women.
I do want to write a book for men next. But yes, this is what a radical awakening is about. It's really about seeing the lies of culture, calling BS BS, and claiming your own inner power and not wasting it in the anxieties that are imposed because you're trying to reach perfection, And it's a wake-up call, especially to women, because we've done ourselves a disservice by believing culture's lies that we should be docile and sweet and quiet. And no, we've lied, and we've destroyed, we've co-created our own misery and our own oppression, and we've participated in toxic masculinity getting to its extreme. We have to take responsibility for that. And when we step into our power, toxic male energy will step back. It'll just happen naturally.
We have one last question for you. I appreciate your time. We have, the whole platform is called Vive. It means life. It comes from the French verb vivre, to live. And I'd love to know for you, Dr. Shefali, and it's a question which you've sort of answered multiple times already, but again, what is life about for you? What is, if you like, what does life mean for you, Dr. Shefali?
The ultimate quest and purpose and most bejeweled gift of life is freedom. So if I'm not free to be myself, free to be, I am not living.
Word. Love that. On that note, Dr. Shefali, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel. You are so conscious. I'm so impressed. I'm so honored to be part of this. And, people always ask me about conscious men. Here, you're one. So thank you for heading and leading the movement and allowing men to see a new possibility for themselves. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
We look forward to speaking to you again very, very soon and collaborating again at Vive.
Bye.
All the best. Bye.